right, we're not gonna... Welcome back to the Yard Renovation. It is officially, I think, year 3. I'm pretty sure it's year 3. I'm gonna have to check that. And I wanna tell you guys, I finally did it. That's right, I finally figured it out. I did math. Yeah, and what I figured out was that this, hold on, let me change frame really quick. This is a lot of dirt, and I mean a lot of dirt. And what I figured out by doing math is that it is more dirt than I can economically or feasibly handle on my own. Now, head injury kind of had me thinking that maybe I could do this even though it was ambitious. But as you can see, even though I've got about, 10 feet back or so, this is just a little bit more than I can handle on my own at this point. There is somewhere between 80 and 100 cubic yards of dirt here, and my trailer can take at most about a yard of it at a time, which means for 100 consecutive iterations, I would have to load up my trailer, figure out somebody who I could drop it at their house, make the time to drive there, unload it, drive back, obviously pay for the gas and stuff. But beyond just the time and the money to do that, I am also just not able to enjoy this yard. I mean, you can see it's a little bit out of hand, but this just does not look good. And this sand gets everywhere. You can see it washes out every storm. But beyond that, the dogs like to go digging in this. They track this inside. It gets in the house. It gets on the bed. It makes the house a mess as well. What it comes down to is I really do not have time to take care of this on top of maintaining this and keeping this mowed, on top of all my other house maintenance projects. And as you can see, my weed whacker died in the last month or so. So now just in those couple weeks, all of these bushes around the edges are so overgrown. Even though I cut out all of these trees and weeds on the edge, it is still overgrown, especially in this region. It's insane how quick this stuff is coming up. So really, I can't even just keep up with this stuff. I need a permanent solution so that I don't have to do this over and over and over again, which means giving up part of the project so I can do more effort on other parts of the project. But anyhow, I am now finally admitting out loud for the first time that a project is too much for me to handle. So with that, let's jump into what I'm doing instead. So this was my master plan. The original reason I did not hire an excavation company is because they wanted to charge between $20,000 and $25,000 to excavate my backyard without building the new retaining wall. So starting with step 1, find somebody who would do it at a realistic and reasonable price that wasn't 10% of what I paid for the entire house. Because to me, $20,000 seems like a ridiculous amount of money considering that this is probably a half day's work. Step 2 would be preparing for that excavation. Like I've said previously, the reason that a lot of people would not bid on this is because the access point to get there is blocked by this fence, which means I will probably have to remove it depending on what equipment they have. And step 3 is start calculating, measuring, and planning for all the other materials that I'm going to need to build the wall once the excavation's complete. There are several different materials you can use to build a retaining wall, and they vary wildly in price. I have no idea what's the best for me at this point, nor do I have any idea what's really going to be within my budget. But the good news is a lot of the excavation companies would probably book several weeks out anyhow, which means I had at least that long to figure this all out. So starting with step 1, finding an excavation company. When I say I called everyone in a 50 to 60-mile radius, I wish I was exaggerating. I am not. A lot of people just directly over the phone would look up the address on Google Maps and said they didn't even want to come out and look at it because it was too small of a job for them. After about 2 or 3 dozen companies that I called, I had 2 or 3 that were probably serious about doing it at a semi-reasonable price point, and everybody else was quoting in the realm of $18,000 to $25,000. Of the other companies, one wasn't available for about 2 months, but they were a lot more reasonable on price, and the other ones were available about a month earlier, but the price was a little bit more. Now in this case, because I know I'm trying to build the entire retaining wall after it, there is a break-even point for how much I'm willing to pay versus how long I'm willing to wait. The purpose of having somebody else do this is so that I'm not waiting the entire summer and that I can actually build the new wall during this time frame. But that said, here's the prices I was looking at. The one that was about a month out was quoting around $6,500, and the one that was about 2 months out, they were quoting for $3,500, which actually seemed reasonable to me, except they were a lot less firm on their time frame. Depending on the spring weather, that means it could have moved up, but it also could have pushed farther out without notice. Fortunately for me, I was actually planning ahead really well on this. I was booking these in March and getting all my quotes ahead of time, so that way when the spring came, everything was already lined up and ready to go. And what I ultimately decided on was the company that quoted me $3,500. Reason being that the extra month
this early in the year is not as big of a deal as it would have been perhaps mid-season or towards the end of the season. But beyond that, they were very upfront with me about why they couldn't touch it until that time frame. Basically, there's another job that they have lined up that they needed this dirt to fill in. That enables them to use their bigger trucks to haul it out, which enables them to get the job done faster and have machines in my yard for less time. The other reason they clearly communicated to me was that if they did it too early in the spring, or if the ground was too wet due to the weather conditions, first of all, it was going to tear up the rest of my yard on the side of my house, but it could also create issues with their equipment because that heavier dirt would be more challenging to move and potentially overload their trucks. Now, don't get me wrong, the cost perspective was a huge consideration. An almost $3,000 cost savings is pretty substantial. But the fact that they were that knowledgeable and transparent with me was a huge selling point, especially when I cross-checked some of the other jobs that were comparable that they had also done. I think to me, having that transparency to say why they were not able to do it earlier was more important because it showed that they really knew what they were doing and they were also being cognizant of any other concerns I might have. And as part of that, I did discuss the access with them and they informed me that that fence was definitely going to be an obstacle, so I offered to remove it. Which brings us into phase 2 of this, prepping for the excavation. As you can see here, I not only had this fence in the way, I also had a number of plants. They said, don't worry about the plants, they are easy enough to be ripped out with their machinery. Which did give me one less thing to worry about, but I am the one who installed this fence, so I am first of all a little bit heartbroken that this now feels like a waste of money, and second of all concerned because I know that these have big concrete footings in the ground below these posts. So not only would they be pretty securely fastened into the ground, but they would also be probably heavier than I could lift. I started by unscrewing the fence panels, and then to get the posts out of the ground, rather than trying to fight them on my own, I put these big eye loops into the side of them at the base and pulled the engine hoist out of my garage, spent a whole lot of effort pushing it over the bricks because it did not roll well. Then, just like when I was removing the bush stumps, hooked it up to the base of the eye loop and then pulled it from the earth with minimal human effort. And to be honest, this worked quite well. I did have to fill in the hole a little bit so that way they could drive over it without issue, but ultimately this moat was not large enough to really be a cause for concern for their equipment. Now they did end up delaying the excavation start date, and I do have 2 dogs that are at least part husky, which means they have a habit of running away every single chance they get. So while I waited, I leaned the fence up to try to block the majority of that opening so my dogs didn't escape on every single chance they had. I also moved this pile of bricks out of the way, and in the process of doing that, I killed about 23,847 spiders. But I would consider that a success and phase 2 to be completed. Which brings us into the depths of phase 3, pricing a new retaining wall. Now obviously in order to accurately price a new retaining wall, first we have to know how big that wall is going to be. So to do that, what I'm doing is estimating where the new wall is going to be placed, then using my tape measure to get some rough dimensions for the total length of it as well as the total height that I think it's going to be. Now obviously I don't have x-ray vision, I cannot see underneath all of this dirt, so I don't know the exact path that it's going to be until we excavate all of this yard. There could be rocks or other obstacles in the way that would cause us to take a slight variation, but if nothing else, this will give us a really solid baseline cost, and it allows us to compare the price between different materials. I will do the full breakdown of how I calculated the size of the wall as well as the breakdown of material costs in a separate video, and I'll link that at the end of this video and in the description below. But for now, that gave me something to work on while waiting for the excavation company to come out. And while price is a major consideration for this project because I am budget limited, the other factors I really had to consider are 1, how visually appealing is this going to look, because that's going to significantly impact resale value of the house, and 2, how easy is the material to put up relative to the other materials. Because if I have 2 materials that are visually very similar, and one might be marginally more expensive, but it takes half the time to install relative to the other material, it might be worth spending that extra couple $100 to save several weeks of labor. So I'll cover that in more detail in the next video as well, but I wanted to start thinking about that now just so I had time to process what I really wanted to do. But that'll do it for this episode. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.